Y'all, thank you for your patience. We are up and running. My name is Julie Jones. I work as a product manager for marketing analytics. And then in my spare time, I have a blog called Learn Web Analytics, where I work to explain web analytics tactics in an easy to comprehend manner. Because let's face it, sometimes this is all really complicated and you just need somebody to explain it like you're five. So today I'm going to cover why it's important to complete this competitive analytics research, some common technology profilers, one of my favorite ones called Analytics Debugger, how to research your competitors without a use of these common technology profilers, a little bit on spying server side, and then lastly, a look at some historical tracking. So why is competitive research super important? So one, you get a good idea of what the technology landscape is. Learn about some tools that maybe you never heard of before. But then also you can understand what's going on in your industry. If 4 out of your 5 competitors are using Eloqua, then maybe it's time you should look into that. But then also that's going to help your business case for a new tool, because no CEO wants to hear, well, here's something the competitor has, or here's something the competitor's doing that we don't have or we're not doing. And then lastly, you can improve your own analytics collection. So with the tools that I'm going to show you today, you can actually look into your competitors' event tracking, see how they're naming things, see what they're tracking. And then you can look at that and say, did I really name that the most intuitive way possible, or is there a better way? So throughout this presentation, I'm going to be showing a screen that looks like this a lot. If you want to follow along, or if you're wondering how I got here, you'll just right-click and inspect on any browser, and then click on the network tab. And then you probably have to reload since the network tab will be empty. So let's talk a little bit about technology profilers. That is the fancy name for some tools that you're probably already familiar with. What Runs, Wapalyzer, BuiltWith. Before I even knew technology profilers were a thing, I used Ghostery, which is an ad blocker, and then I used that to see what all ad scripts were loading. And then ObservePoint is a tag manager debugger that's kind of getting into the space. So how do these things work? How do they tell you a company's whole MarTech stack? Well, whenever you deploy any form of tracking on your website, you've got to do that through code, right? And that code, whether it's JavaScript, HTML, your network request, you just have to find a way to make that go. And each tracking technology is going to have a unique method for how they deploy that. So for example, if you do your Facebook event tracking, that's fbevents.js. And so what these technology profilers will do is they'll search for those. Now here's what they're doing. So you'll see here that I typed in collect. That is what Google Analytics, what they call their script. And sure enough, if you look on the right-hand side of my screen, you see somebody's Universal Analytics tracking code. And Google didn't change whenever they switched to GA4. Again, on the right, you'll see the GA4 tracking code. For Facebook, I just searched for Facebook. Voila, their Facebook events pulled up, and I've got their Facebook advertising ID right there. And then this was a little funny whenever I discovered, or whenever I was doing research for this presentation. Charlotte Roos, if y'all are watching, the add to cart fired upon me loading your website, so you probably want to fix that because it didn't actually add anything to cart yet. And then avocados from Mexico. So LinkedIn also uses collect as part of the name of their script, but you can just do a simple search for LinkedIn, and then all of a sudden you have their advertising ID in there. So what the technology profilers do is they run their filters against these common scripts, and it works pretty well, but they're not perfect. So there are a couple of drawbacks. One is you can trick the technology profiler. Actually, I'm going to start with a different one. So you can capture these web scripts, but you're really dependent on how expansive your technology profiler is. So for example, how many tracking technologies does BuiltWith have? How many does What Runs has? And Wappalizer, that actually used to be open source. So you could see a list of all the different filters that they were running against the tracking scripts that you were loading. However, a couple of months ago, the open source changed to closed source. And so we can kind of search the web and see some of those filters in the past. But it's still, now you're kind of dealing with the black box that you are with all these other technology profilers. And then the second one is that your developers can actually choose to change how these scripts are referenced. Now, I'm not a developer, so this is a little bit over my head, but this guy named Julian Vernat, he had a great article on a couple of different ways that your developers can kind of obfuscate what tracking scripts you're running. I would say, though, just make sure you're doing this ethically. If somebody wants to block your trackers, they should be allowed to block your trackers. And then Julian actually wrote this fantastic article that's called Wappalizer is Unreliable and It Doesn't Matter. And that's because he reverse engineered the filter. And you'll look on his website, and a very teeny number up there says that he is running 1,900 tracking technologies. And he's not really. I mean, you see 10 CMS listed up there alone. And so what he did was he just put in all of these dummy scripts that would trick Wappalizer into thinking that somebody was running it. But technology profilers are still a great tool for easy analysis. You just have to know their limitations. And my favorite one dives really deep into the world of analytics. It is called Analytics Debugger. You'll know that you've reached the right one because there's a little rubber ducky, which is super cute. I've also got a QR code up here. So Analytics Debugger differentiates itself a little bit because instead of diving into your marketing stack and going very expansive but not very deep, David took this special little carve out for analytics and he went real deep. And with the migration to GA4, a lot of people jumped ship. And so David took into consideration this whenever he was looking at his extension, and he can actually look for Adobe, Google, Matomo, Paywick Pro for any of y'all who were in Damon's session, Amplitude, Plausible, Snowplow. Like, you just have a world at your fingertips. And then I also really like the detail that it goes into. So is your competitor tracking certain events? Have they enabled Google Signals? So for my paid search friends out there, like, this is a big deal. It's a game changer in Google Ads, right? What if an event is marked as a particular conversion? This debugger tool that I'm going to show you can find that out as well. Have they enabled consent mode? So this is really important going back to the industry trends, because now industry trends aren't just what are you tracking, but it's also, oh no, what's the legislation that's happening right now? So for example, Texas, they just passed a law on tracking. And so if you're seeing your competitors start to implement some form of consent mode, maybe time to take a step back and say, okay, let's think about this. And then also, I think what's a really game changer is that David's plugin is able to tell you if somebody's using server-side tagging. And I'm going to go into why that's a big deal a little bit later.
Julie, I can see this as a really good sales tool for a prospect.
Yes, absolutely. So David's plugin is super, super easy to use. I forget that I'm shorter than the average person. So David's plugin is super easy to use. You'll see here on Hobby Lobby's website, I clicked subscribe, and sure enough, the email subscribe popped up. It's able to tell me if I have Google Signals enabled, server-side tagging, consent mode. Turns out that that email subscribe is marked as a conversion. But how does he know all of this? Like, it seems super secret, right? Well, not really. So whenever you deploy a Google Analytics tag, it changes based on what you've configured. Each parameter in the request that you see actually has a label of some sort that matches up to the measurement protocol. So those of y'all who are like knee deep in Google Analytics, you eat, sleep, breathe it, y'all may know what this is, but for those who aren't, the measurement protocol is how you send offline events to Google Analytics. And so whenever you're looking at this big request URL and you're like, oh, it's just gobbledygook. No, it's not. It's using that measurement protocol that Google made available to all of us for sending data into Google Analytics. And David makes it really, really easy. So he put up the measurement protocol guide on his website, but we'll go through all these different parameters and you'll start to recognize like, okay, I got this down. This is pretty simple. Now, Google Signals is a little bit different. It's not going to use parameters on the website. It's not using the measurement protocol. Instead, you're going to look at where that data is going. And I mentioned Google Signals was really important for our friends over in Google Ads because this is what enables cross-device reporting. So even if you're just in analytics, not necessarily in paid search, tell your paid search folks about this. Let them know like, hey, they're taking advantage of something. We can make a better business case for that, why we need it on our website. So you'll see here, Hobby Lobby, they do have Google Signals enabled. And then you'll see the endpoint down here. It's analytics.google.com. And what that translates to, whenever you look in your network tab, is that request URL. It's your same analytics.google.com. Now, I had to search far and wide for somebody who did not enable Google Signals, but HEB does not. And you'll notice their endpoint is not analytics.google.com. Instead, their endpoint is www.google-analytics.com. And we look in the network tab again. Sure enough, this is just what David is scraping with his plugin. The request URL is www.google-analytics.com. I do also want to add one caveat. If you do enable Google Signals, make sure it's reflected in your privacy policy. It's one of those fine print details that Google doesn't really publicize. But technically, if you don't mention that you're using Google Signals in your privacy policy, you're actually going against their terms of service. So just a call out for that. Now, let's talk about how we do all this stuff without David's super awesome, cool plugin. It's, technology is just, we're just reading scripts. And we saw with that Wappalizer isn't accurate and it really doesn't matter article, like you can actually trick these technology profilers. So what I want to teach y'all how to do is I want to teach y'all how to investigate without using these plugins. What if they go closed source? What if, they explode? I don't know. But let's start off with Google Events. So each event that gets sent to Google Analytics uses that parameter EN. We picked this up directly from the measurement protocol. It's no big secret. And so whenever I clicked on that Hobby Lobby subscription, you'll see it in here. Y'all get a copy of this for those of y'all who don't have supervision. You'll see here EN:\email subscribe. So that's their name. And then C is the number 1. That means that, yes, this is a conversion. Go down here. What that says is EP.page type. And they listed their page type as home. Anything that you see with EP. That means an event parameter. So if they're custom defining anything to go along with their events, boom, you've just got some insight into their tracking plan. You may be wondering at this point, like, okay, so do I just go into my competitor's website and click every button imaginable? No, that'd take too much time, right? So instead of looking for your collect script with Google Analytics, instead, what if we do that with GTM? Because all of this is just code, right? It's just a script. And sure enough, if you look in the response for GTM, boom, I have just downloaded, or not downloaded, it's still on my browser, but Hobby Lobby's whole tracking plan. So we see Universal Analytics events. They still have them running. They have a site search submitted, and then they go a little bit down, and they have another event called site search, third event called site search, product details page, out of stock notifications. And this is telling you the category, the action, the label. And if you have a competitor who has not fully switched over to GA4, look this up now. Get their whole Universal Analytics tracking plan, which is likely to be more mature, copy that, and then translate it into your own GA4 events. And then we've got GA4 events are actually going to be _GAAWE. Now, here's what I want to call out here. And I know it's very small, but you'll see that some of the event names are marked macro. Got that right here. So I want to have a little bit of word about macros. Macros are going to refer to different variables in your Google Tag Manager container. These are much harder to debug. So if you hit a wall with this, it's okay. We've just hit the more complex part. But what you can do is you can still look in that GTM container and you can see where they're mapped out to. So here, just look for the map in the request and it'll kind of tell you, okay, this macro is actually referring to page location. Same with this. I have a regex table. The macro is referenced right here as well. So let's go back to the easy to spot tracking because macros, they're going to take a little bit for you to debug. And like we had somebody say before, like sometimes this is just a really great sales tool. Like where are easy wins to pitch? So we've got Bing Universal Tracking, or I'm sorry, that's AdWords Conversion Tracking, AWCT. We've got Enhanced Conversions. So my paid search folks over here, if you're wanting to know if your competitors are running enhanced conversions, it's just another parameter. It's right here and you can find it. And then we've also got some custom HTML scripts. So you'll see in the first little box, that highlight right there is FBQ. That is just their Facebook pixel that they're running from their GTM container. The second one is Criteo. And then we've got Bing Ads Universal Tracking, which is BAUT. We scroll down farther and boom, I can see everybody's variables. So you see CN, RE, EQ. Well, that's not rocket science either. This is just referencing the different types of ways that you can configure your variable. The fun doesn't stop there though, okay? GTM is not the only tag manager that you can debug. You can also do this with Telium. You can do it, or sorry, that was Adobe. You can do this with Adobe Tag Manager. You can do this with Telium. And here's why you want to make sure that you keep on debugging in your network tab. This is a super exciting thing that I learned just last week. So I took my website and I said, okay, let's play with it a little bit. I'm going to add a fake Google Ads tag and I'm going to turn off enhanced conversions. But you run that script and you actually see AWEC in your Google Tag Manager script. And so this is just a reminder. See at the top where I put that in? Again, we're just looking at scripts here. And what happened there, why AdWords Enhanced Conversion is showing up in this, but it's not showing up here, is because I have two different workspaces. And in one of them, I had enhanced conversions. In the other one, I did not have enhanced conversions. So what I did was I actually published enhanced conversions in a workspace that wasn't live, but I turned it off in the one that is live. This was a little bit theoretical, so I said, okay, let's write it down. So I added a Google Ads tag to my default workspace. I turned on enhanced conversions, published that workspace. I created a second workspace, and then I made a change, slight change. I turned on enhanced conversions in the default workspace, and then published that second default workspace again, but workspace number one still had the old configurations, which is why you always want to debug Google Tag Manager within that network tab and not just put googletagmanager.com / the Google Tag Manager script in your browser. So this is still really useful. How many of y'all have inherited old tracking from somebody before you? Okay. How many of you would say, this is the most clean tracking that I've ever seen and I know exactly where everything is, right? So if you've got some rogue Google Tag Manager containers, like great, all you need to know is the code. And you just plug this in up here And yeah, it takes a little bit more work, but you get a developer by your side and you can tell exactly what you were running in the past. And you can actually see here at some point what version number this is. But in summary, make sure you're looking here to know what's actually live and not just in an unpublished workspace. How are we tracking? Everybody good so far? Any questions? Going a little quick since we had the technical hiccups in the beginning. Thank goodness for our IT people who got us back. So sometimes it's still useful to debug one thing at a time. So this is exciting for anybody who's running any form of paid social. So here we have the jcpenney.com website. I signed up using a certain email. And when I signed up, we had this Facebook event and that fired. And if I keep scrolling down with that Facebook request URL, I notice something in here that says Duff EM equals, and then a bunch of gobbledygook. Now the EM equals, I said, well, that kind of sounds like email that they're sending to Facebook. And I know as a marketer that anytime we send emails to Facebook, we've got to encrypt it using SHA-256 encryption. So I'm thinking here, okay, this should be pretty easy to either prove or disprove. So what I did was I went online and I said, find me a SHA-256 encoder. I put my email in there and it populated the hash. Sure enough, the two of them match. So I know that they are turning on advanced matching within Facebook because my email, whenever I submit a form, is going to Facebook and it's hashed. So JCPenney is doing best practices, but my email is also going to Facebook. So let's talk about spying server side. How many of y'all have heard about server side tracking? Okay, this is gonna blow your mind. So we've been doing all of our tracking client side. And client side just means, hey, it runs right in the browser, in your device. Whenever you think about installing a pixel, it's just JavaScript that's running client side, right? And so if tracking is client side, it is super easy to debug in the browser. But server side tracking doesn't work like that. You don't have things generally running in the client. There's not your scripts or there aren't the network calls. Think about this from a marketing perspective. You've just hidden everything that you're doing from the browser. But it also means that whenever you're trying to debug a competitor who's got this server-side implementation, it makes it a little bit harder to debug. We've got some clues though, okay? And that's what we're going to have to rely on. It's not going to be as direct as your client-side debugging, but it's not impossible, especially if your competitor is running Google Ads. So Google Ads requires you to send an event to the client if you're running anything server side. Whoa, what does that mean, Julie? That wasn't even a sentence. Let's look at this from a picture. I like pictures. So think about your client environment. You've got any user device, your laptop, your phone, and with that, you run a client-side GTM container, which is just the normal Google Tag Manager container that we've all been used to since, well, whenever Google invented it. And then you've got our server environment, and that's where you're running your server-side Google Tag Manager container. So let's say your competitors said, we're going to be sneaky. We're not running anything client-side anymore. We're running it all server-side because we don't want people debugging in the client. Well, what's going to happen is you actually still have to have a tag in the client. Like there has to be something that shows you that somebody's clicking on buttons, they're clicking CTAs. And then what happens is that tag goes to the server goes to what's also called a client. Google, I think that was terrible naming conventions. But then that goes to your different tags, which then through the use of APIs goes here. But the idea is that you still have to have some form of client tag that fires. You just may not necessarily know what the endpoints are if somebody's running server side. So I think that there have been mumblings about Facebook ads completely deprecating their pixel. Okay, this is how you're going to have to debug because you're not going to see it in the browser anymore that somebody has turned on advanced matching within Facebook. And what's really cool is that, going back to my favorite plugin ever, is that David's plugin actually is able to tell us if somebody is running server side. And that's because the endpoint changed. So this is Joanne's. You can actually name this whatever you want. Please use it ethically, okay? But SGTM is just a name that Joanne's made up. Whereas, like, you know, for example, Hobby Lobby, they're not running any form of server-side tagging. So whenever their GA4 events go to Google Analytics, it goes through your standard analytics.google.com. Again, hearkening back to, hey, they're running Google Signals. And then HEB, once again, not a special sgtm.heb.com, because they're not running Google, or because they're not running server-side tagging, but they're also not running Google Signals. So we've got the www.googleanalytics or google-analytics.com. And we can even see, you know, once again, David's tool is a technology profiler. Technology profilers just read what's in the browser. And then here we have that request URL that's sgtm.joanne.com. Okay. So, but even though Joanne's is running server-side tagging, like I mentioned earlier, we still have those client-side events. So next, another thing that you can do if you're trying to investigate somebody's server side is you can look at what data is pushed to the client, okay? So what do I mean by this? Well, e-commerce websites generally have Google Analytics enhanced e-commerce tracking. And Google's method of implementation for that is still, oh, well, you have to push stuff to the data layer. The data layer is inherently a client concept. And so Joanne's, even though they're running server side, they're following Google's best practices. And so they're pushing all the data that they need to track to the data layer. And that way it can then again go to the client side tag, to then go to the server side tag, to then go to all your different endpoints, your Facebook, your Google Ads, Snapchat. And then the last thing that you can do is you can investigate scripts that don't necessarily have a server side option. So this was Bing until like 2 weeks ago. They finally released their conversions API. But if they were tracking things in Bing, or maybe your different display platforms, you're going to see some sort of trail of that. And like, why would you track something on Bing, but you wouldn't track something on Google Ads? Maybe my paid search people have like a really good reason, but like, use your noggin, folks. So then let's talk about spying on historical data. Here we got the present, cool, server side, client side, we got all this. But sometimes you want to actually know what they were tracking in the past. When did somebody make a change to their analytics tracking? And some profilers like BuiltWith, they'll actually tell you when somebody had a tracking script on their website. But with the use of the Internet Archive, you can too. Now, you may have a little bit of trouble with some server-side components, but so for example, here I pulled up Kate Spade, also running server-side tracking, and I can't see any of the server-side requests on the Wayback Machine. But if I right-click and view source, I got Kate Spade's old Google Analytics code. And then I looked in 2022 and turns out they took it out manually and now they put it into GTM. And here's the real light at the end of the tunnel, okay? Because this was a lot of things to know and learn. I got so excited doing research for this presentation, and I was telling one of my teammates about how much I was learning. And she goes, "That's great, Julie, but you know, ChatGPT and Bard can figure this out for you." So definitely got outsmarted on that one. But, you know, it's very interesting. When I was trying to figure out why AdWords Enhanced Conversion was showing up in Google Tag Manager some places, but not in others, I plugged this into ChatGPT and they gave me an answer. And what my teammate noted was, she said, "Well, Julie, you're dealing with Google parameters. Like, wouldn't it make more sense to put it in Google's AI engine?" And sure enough, Bard gave me a better response. So you won't get all the answers, but it'll give you enough to like start sniffing around. And that way you don't feel like you're out alone on an island and not a developer. So just some final notes here. We got 3 things to remember. 1, you need competitive research. It's going to help you understand the MarTech stack in the industry. It's going to help you stress test your current tracking. 2, you can inspect your client-side tag manager and analytics scripts to better understand what your competitors are doing. But then lastly, don't feel the need to know everything. You know now how to right-click, inspect, and then look at the network tab, copy and paste part of that into Bard, into ChatGPT, help them kind of figure it out for you because these things are going to change often. And then a little, I like to give a little thanks at the end of all my slides. I wouldn't know what I know if it weren't for amazing people that write articles and work with me and teach me things. So David, who has the analytics debugger script, Julian, who wrote the amazing article on why Wappleizer is wrong and it doesn't matter. And then one of my teammates, Monica Young, one of the smartest people I've ever met. And then lastly, just one last mention. You know, y'all are experts too. I have helped run Stata Search for I think about 5 or 6 years now. And we always need new speakers. And so if your coworkers constantly go to you because you've got this one thing that you can do better than the rest of the agency, or you're just really passionate about something, like you should go and pitch to speak. And the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to turn you down and you say, okay, great. Well, I'll try again next year. So then don't be intimidated if you've never spoken before. It is an exhilarating experience and you learn lots along the way. So hope I didn't make anybody too angry by flipping the birds, but that's what I got. Any questions?
There was a tool called TouchOn back in the day or something where you could actually see what conversions were being tracked. Similar, I was doing something similar now where you can actually see conversions and how many conversions they might be having. I haven't like paid for the upgrade.
Yeah, so that's likely, if I were to take a guess, that would likely be from either crawling the website or GTM because they're all scripts. Yeah. What's your question? Yeah, sorry, I have a lazy eye.
So I come from the organic Google Maps side of the house,
Uh-huh.
and so a lot of this was very foreign to me. And so my question is, I guess, what are the insights we gain from, I guess, seeing these tracking codes? Do you get to, like,
Yeah.
really see the analytics side?
So for me, I had 2 benefits. One, I did want to know where I needed to improve my analytics collection because I knew that marketing couldn't function if they didn't have data to operate off of. And, you know, you'd be silly to think that you're the smartest person in the room. So I was like, fine, let me look at all my industry websites and see what they're tracking. And that way, again, marketing had what they needed. The other one is a little, I guess maybe sadistic would be the right word. I work in a highly regulated industry. So I'm always figuring out or trying to figure out people that are doing things that they shouldn't be. And so that was kind of what led to my curiosity. I think overall the best takeaway and the best value add is, are you giving your marketing team all the data that they need to make decisions? And this will help you figure that out. Yeah. Any other questions?
The feedback is not so much about metrics, but something I know our clients really appreciate. Actually, what inspired it was Dave Collins at Public Storage used to love to see slides at the end of our monthly reports that showed pages on competitor sites and how they evolved and changed every month.
Yes.
And so we'll do homepage, we'll do location page, category page, you know, all those different key templates, search result page, and we'll annotate what's changed with the competitor over the last month. And you can get some in the Philippines to do it for pennies every month, right? But
So have you done that in the Wayback Machine?
In the past, yeah.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
just doing it every month, just kind of taking a look at what changed, and then we get the new screenshot then someone on the SEO team makes the annotations
Mhm.
and inferences, but clients love to see that. Sometimes they'll be quiet the whole presentation. At the end, they'll say, hold on, let me look at the competitors and the website. They really want to see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Okay, well, thank y'all all for your time. I think we have one last presentation in the main room, but thank you for coming.